Time is a fundamental force of the universe. It transcends our human existence and will continue to exist both before and after humanity. If we were to compress the timeline of the universe into a year, humanity's existence will only occupy the final 10 hours of December 31st. This fundamental force remains indifferent to our actions, and whatever we create will always be ravished by it. Nations will rise and fall, our stories will start and end, yet time will always march on. It is woven into the very fabric of our universe. It dictates our existence, and no matter what we do to hinder it, we are utterly powerless in its wake. But what if we could take this powerful force and bend it to our will? What if we could control time? As humans, we do everything in our power to control the flow of time, but we ultimately fail because we live in the real world. But in a genre like fantasy where different worlds exist with different rules, our imaginations can run wild. In fantasy, we can use time as a power that can be manipulated. From regressions, time magic, and time dilations in dungeons to personal time loops, there are lots of ways that our protagonists can use the power of time. Regressions are a staple of the progression fantasy genre. There are hundreds of stories about characters traveling through time, and they mostly fall into two categories: action-packed fantasy and drama romance. Regardless of subgenre, regressions start off the same. Some force sends the main character back through time to hopefully correct their past mistakes and live a better life. Series for action-packed fantasy include Apocalypse Cultivation, Monarch, A Prince Out of Time, Apocalypse Redux, After the End Serenity, Return of the Tower Conqueror, Third Apocalypse, a generic Reincarnation Apocalypse, Second Chance Apocalypse, a dungeon monster tamer, Towers of Heaven, a returner should be special, the legendary mechanic. And for drama regression, we have The Eldest Daughter Walks Down the Flower Path, The Villainess Behind the Mask, The Villainess Lives Twice, The Villainess Turns the Hourglass, Saving My Sweetheart, Please Marry Me Again Husband. In an average action-packed regression story, we start off in a less than ideal future. The Earth is either overrun by monsters, sometimes brought on by the system, or humanity has failed some grand cosmic test. In essence, it's an apocalypse. Society is either gone or almost gone, and it's up to the main character, who is set back in time to stop this collapse and potentially save humanity. In Apocalypse Redux, the story opens with the last army of humanity trying to clear the 7th layer of a tower. 50,000 of the last surviving humans in the world. People from China, Russia, France, America, just about any place you can think of. And in the midst of this grand army is two best friends, Michael and Shin. They're fighting a losing battle. They outnumber the opposing force by a factor of 50, but yet they're being slaughtered, almost toyed with. Michael Tamer is just 20 to 28 years old with the power of a swordsman, and he's not particularly strong, but on the opposing side is the Morian General Keller, a god-tier warrior, an actual deity, and he easily slaughters humanity's champions and mocks them. Despite being the weakest race in the tower, humanity has made it pretty far, but regardless, they failed to conquer the floor, and they will go extinct. And as the army is ripped apart, as Michael sees his best friend Shin die, he tries to fight, but he ultimately dies, and in his last moments he laments that he couldn't change anything. As he dies, a small purple ring on his finger begins to vibrate with power. All of his desire, all of his longing to change the past activates the ring, and it turns out to be a divine artifact, a wishing ring. Michael wakes up, and he's on Earth. There's no more status screens, no more war, no more apocalypse. He's now a regular 18-year-old finishing up high school preparing to go to college. And as the ring on his finger disintegrates, Michael realizes that he's gone back in time. And this time, Michael makes a vow to himself. Humanity will survive, and he will change the future. In the same vein as Apocalypse Redux and Second Chance Apocalypse, they both start with the main characters being the last humans alive after humanity fails to repel their invaders, and our main characters are on the verge of death. And as you probably realize, this is where regression stories usually start, dying or on the verge of death. Some force sends our main characters back in time, through a system, a skill, divine intervention, or even mixes of all three. Our character travels back through time, some to the very start of their adventures with all their knowledge and skill still intact, and some even gaining new skills through the regression process. But regressions are only the tip of the iceberg. Another way you can manipulate time is through the system or unique skills. There's low-level time manipulation by increasing your perception of time. This happens in stories with a system, as that point directly correlates to increasing your speed of thought. Then there are skills like those in Blessed Time. The main character Micah, you could call a time mage, in addition to his multiple regressions, has several time-related abilities. One of them is to rapidly age the body parts of enemies. But I just said something very interesting. Multiple regressions. What exactly is that? That brings us to our next topic, time loops. What is the distinction between a time loop and a regression? And can you have both at the same time? In a time loop, the main character can go back in time infinitely or a set number of times, while in the regression, there is only one opportunity. But there are cases where someone can regress infinitely. The stubborn skill grinder in a time loop. A keening wail ringing in the night sky awoke him. Oridan was a light sleeper in general, but the shrill shriek of a harpy, even if distant, was enough to awake most people. The bloody birds were a public menace. Living in one of the poorest neighborhoods on the outskirts of the greater capital area didn't help, of course. No archers or battle mages around to shoot the damn things down. Sometimes he found himself wishing the Griffin Riders would do a flyover and clean up one day. Worst of all, the stupid things hunted in flocks, and their flight path to and from their hunting grounds was above his district of Ogdenboro, taking in tandem with the fact that they hunted at night. No wonder property values in Ogdenboro were so abysmal. Arden Cartwright is a 17-year-old boy who wakes up every day to clean his house before joining up with the town guard. That is, until the attack. Unknown elites attack the town square and Arden acts, but he dies in the process, and he finds himself in his own bed as if the day never happened. And what does he do with this new chance? Well, he rushes right back into the fight he just lost, and he dies again. This time, armed with the knowledge that he's in a time loop, Orodin is determined to grind his skills against his enemies. After all, he is the stubborn skill grinder.
And if we're talking about time loops, we can't forget Mother of Learning.
Dorian is a teenage mage of humble birth and slightly above average skill, attending his third year of education at Sioria's Magical Academy. He's a driven and irritable young man, consumed by a desire to ensure his own future and free himself from the influence of his family, whom he resents for favoring his brothers over him. Consequently, he has no time for pointless distractions or paying attention to other people's problems. As it happens, time is something he's about to get plenty of. On the eve of Sioria's annual summer festival, he is killed and brought back to the beginning of the month, just before he's about to take a train to Sioria. Suddenly trapped in a time loop with no clear end or exit, Zorian will have to look both within and without to unravel the mystery before him. And he does have to unravel it, for the time loop hadn't been made for his sake, and dangers lurk everywhere. Repetition is the mother of learning, but Zorian will have to first make sure that he survives to try again. In a world of magic, even a time traveler isn't safe from those who wish him ill. Time is a fun concept to play around with, whether you time travel once in the regression or continue to use time as a power you can manipulate. Of course, using time opens an entirely new can of worms in your story. You have to figure out how exactly time works. You have to set specific rules, and does your timeline break every chapter because of the actions of the main character? Do plot holes become more of a problem, and is a paradox likely to occur? Here's how the timeline of Omniscient Reader works. So, this is the timeline. On point A, it's in the end. Let's say this is the main character trudging along. Let's use a different color. This is the main character trudging along in his timeline. He reaches a point here where he dies, and so he regresses when he dies. So this is as it really works. There's a different parallel timeline that also goes from A to end, and there's an infinite amount of these parallel timelines. And so what happens is that he starts from this parallel A, he regresses all the way back to the beginning in this exactly the same duplicate time. And he knows what to do now, so he just trudges along. He gets further because he's already regressed up to that point. Let's say maybe he dies here and needs to regress. Now at this point, since there's an infinite amount of these parallel timelines, fan from A to N. So at this point, you know what happens? He regresses all the way back to the beginning. Then he treads his log, and he gets a little bit further each time with each regression. But here's another thing. These timelines, they continue after he dies. After the main character regresses back in timeline, let's say timeline 1, timeline continues after he's dead. In timeline 2, after he regressed and went to timeline 3, timeline 2 continues. Timeline 3 continues. And remember, there's an infinite amount of these timelines. So 5, 6, 7, 8, all the 9, ... all the way to infinity.
And obviously with regression, there's lots of caveats. Why doesn't he or she stop more bad situations from happening if he really regressed? Why doesn't he help more people? A lot of stories just muddle through morality problems and hope we don't ask too many questions. Does your character really have justification for what they do? Popular media has tackled this issue in franchises like Back to the Future, Tenet, Terminator, some books and manga, and of course the comic book industry. That's it. That's the video. All there is to say is bye bye. Sayonara. 僕は田舎に引っ越したい。つま